All right, good day, everyone. This is our third installment of kind of Interview the Influencer. I'm Sean Luchins, General Manager of Total Rewards at Visier, and I am lucky enough to have the genius that is Teri Zipper today from Sapient. How are you, Teri?
I'm great. How are you, Sean?
I'm good. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to try to flip things around. I know you've been doing your podcast, so thought flip it around and kind of assimilate all the information you've gathered from all your guests and ask you some questions. But before we get started, can you give us kind of a history, which I know some of it since we used to work together, but if you gave the elevator pitch of your history, that would be awesome.
Sure. Yeah. So I cut my teeth in tech and more specifically around financials, and somehow managed to land a job in payroll where I ended up implementing a new HRIS payroll system. And as a result of that background, I got hired at Mercer and spent about 20 years there doing tech, HR, comp consulting, where I met you. And when I got tired of working for somebody else, I decided to work for myself. And that's when I met and reconnected with Susan Richards and a little bit later, Stacey Harris, and we formed Sapient Insights Group. So that's how I got here.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize it was 20 years at Mercer.
Yeah.
That's a while.
It was a while.
It was a while. And what do you do for fun when you're not running Sapient?
Well, I love to bike. So I spend a lot of time on my bike, and we've got some nice parks close by that we can spend. You're probably familiar with some of them, as I know you used to live here. And so there's some great places to bike, and I'll do a little bit of hiking there too. They've got some nice areas. And then reading. I like to read. Other than that, I'm not doing a whole lot of exciting stuff.
So the all-important question when we talk about reading, are you real book or Kindle?
Oh, Kindle. Yeah.
Really?
I mean, it's hard to carry around a book. I love books, but yeah, I read everything online.
I'm 50-50. I started to transition over, and then I kind of all the way to Kindle, and then I kind of came back to some of the books. So
oh, really?
Hardcover book. Yeah, kind of. I can't quite convert all the way.
Yeah. I've got a lot of books around here, but usually when I start reading one, I'm like, okay, let me just see if it's available on Kindle so I can take it with me everywhere I go.
Well, I've got a series of questions, but first we get there. How did you end up start podcasting? So you got over to Sapient, you got that stuff going, and then all of a sudden you're podcasting, and you and Stacey are podcasting, every other week, every week?
Yeah. So I will say I was kind of guilted into it. It was not something I actually wanted to do. But we had started it, and somebody else was leading it at the time. There was two that were sort of spilling the tea on HR tech, which is the one Stacey does. And Stacey's got a background in TV and radio. So, this is like old hat to her. And so she was really focused on just doing kind of what's happening in the world of HR technology and sort of what's the news of the day. So hers is very topical, and she likes to make sure that hers, go out every other week because that's when things are happening. That's when the news is happening. Mine, on the other hand, it's called HR We Have a Problem. And like I said, somebody else had been hosting it, and we had kind of let it sit for the summer. And when this person left, it was like, well, Teri, you need to pick up the podcast. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, I don't think so. But, I looked at the stats, I looked at the listeners, and we had a following. And I thought, okay, how hard can this be? Like, let me just try it with a few people. You were one of my early people that I had on the show because I thought, if I screw this up with somebody I know, it won't be so bad. And I liked it. I actually enjoyed doing it, and, felt like I got some information. I gave some information, and I just kept it going. So I haven't really looked back after that. It's a lot of fun, and people like doing it. And I think our listenership has grown tremendously. So, yeah, I'm really excited about that.
How long is that? A year and a half now, if I'm trying to remember correctly?
I started last December.
Okay.
So it's been a year.
Year.
Yeah, I made it a whole year.
Okay. That's a lot. That's a lot. 26 plus episodes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So taking that in mind, so we broke it into a couple of questions. So I wanted to pick your brain. Basically, if you look back at the last 12, 18 months, what outside of AI, what is the biggest change you've seen in the past 12 or 18 months?
Yeah. Did anybody talk about anything other than AI last year?
I know. Well, that's why I'm trying to pick it out, because it's been all AI.
Yeah, no, it really has. And I think, there's not really one thing. I don't think everything always seems to tie back to technology and being more digital. And, that's great. I mean, we've all seen the benefits of having tech automate and streamline the work we do and, help us put our business in the cloud. But, one of the things that we've been focusing on a little more is what about the people? We've had some pretty big changes in the world over the last couple of years. I've started to see a shift in the focus on people and the organizational culture. And, HRMS has longed for doing things in their technology that would drive culture. But, it's almost like the other side of the coin when you think about AI, right? Because, people are concerned that AI is going to replace their jobs and those types of things. But at the same time, we don't believe that. And, where are we going to derive that culture from? Is that going to be internal? Is it going to be driven by us? Or is that going to be driven by the technology? Like, something we really need to think about. And, I'm seeing a lot more work in the engagement area and also around, just, leadership development, coaching, team building, and just overall focus on, like, what is your culture and how is that going to help you build your business? And what's the impact of your culture going to be on the technology and AI instead of the other way around? Because I don't think any of us want that to be driven by the AI. In fact, that's, I think, the thing people are most concerned about is, what exactly AI is going to do to their business and how is it going to impact their culture, and is it going to become sentient and take over the world? But no.
Nice reference, by the way.
Yeah.
So I guess
we've all seen Terminator, right?
I know. That's a nice retro reference. So do you think, though, you've gone from, when you talk about culture, to me, a couple things come up. You went from, COVID, and as someone who's worked remote for 20 years, I found it very unique, the whole, everyone had to go remote and what a shift that was, because I've been remote and was the outlier to being the norm. How do you think companies have been able to tackle this kind of culture issue when you've gone from everyone in the office to everyone to remote to now all these hybrid different modes and modalities, and how do they drive culture? And I guess the second part, you can answer it any way you want, would be, how do you measure success of that culture? Because there's talking about culture, right? And nobody, at least to my sense, when I've looked online, no one has said we have a crappy culture. Come work here. Yeah. Everyone says we've got a great culture and everything's great. How do you measure whether you're actually being able to, move that culture down? What do you measure analytically?
Yeah. So I think, ultimately the way you measure it is through the people. And you can look at this through other analytics and statistics from the organization. And, are people leaving the organization more quickly than you would anticipate? You're not going to read it in your job description, right? Because the job description is basically going to say, we're a great place to work. And we've won an award for it, and so on and so forth. So, a lot of this is going to be, more coming from the people who work there. Glassdoor is a great example of, take it with a grain of salt, but there's some good information out there around what's really happening in these businesses. And I think people are relying on that kind of information to figure that out. But I think if you think about the way that an organization operates and the whole remote work issue, people are bringing people back to the office. It's not 100%. I don't think it's ever going to be 100%. I think people are going to work generally more remotely than anything else, especially in the staff functions. Obviously, there's work to be done that has to be done in an operation, and that's going to be a very different place. So it is, I think, a different environment for people that are in those staff functions who can work remotely and don't need to be in an office. And I think organizations from an HR perspective need to think about how are they going to align new people coming into the business to their culture, especially the younger generation who don't have an opportunity to, sit in an office and learn from somebody next to somebody, go to lunch, once or twice a week and learn some things that they wouldn't normally learn or understand kind of the dynamics of the organization. It's very, very different. And I think it's putting a tax on not just HR, but the managers to sort of figure out how am I going to approach managing new people in this organization and working with them via Zoom, right? Or Teams or this online presence. How do I make this accessible to them? How do I, know what's going on in their world? Because I don't see them down the hall. I don't see them at the water cooler. And so I think that's, yes, people are going to do employee engagement surveys and, get all sorts of data back from that. But at the end of the day, you've really got to be in touch with people and know what's going on in their world. And I think that's, to me, that it's going to take a little bit different set of skills that, that we really need to look at and make sure that, the people that we're putting in these leadership positions have the right skills to bring people along and to bring them into the culture and make sure that they're focused on the same, objectives we are.
It's interesting because I think you can now measure, obviously we think so. You're able to measure turnover for remote people, in the office people, turnover by gender, how long in each position. You can get your arms around those numbers now, which is something new, right? So you've got now people analytics to look at that. But then the second part of it is, well, how do I actually solve the problem? The analytics will solve the problem. They highlight the problem for you and show your success or your ability to create change. And do they have the willingness to do that? Because I think in the past, before the analytics, you could go with the ostrich method. Just put your head in the sand and kind of do some anecdotal things, or you could say Glassdoor is not great or whatever it was.
Right.
But now there's hard data to say, these things are different and how do I affect change? It is interesting. It's the human and human resources. I think I've heard some people say it's kind of gone from human to technology, and now it's kind of the pendulum swinging back a little bit to being more human and human resources.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to have that. And I think, it's interesting what some of the things that we saw in the data. 54% of HR tech professionals right now have less than 3 years of experience. And I doubt that number is all that different when you look at some of the other areas in the business. And so, organizations are not only losing a lot of institutional knowledge, but they're also, to some extent, their culture's evolving, right? As the people leave the business and new people come into the business. And, I'm not a big proponent of the, what group you're in, right? What are you, a boomer or are you a Gen X or millennial, whatever? And there, clearly there's some nuances, but there really is sort of a different group of people coming into the business and a bigger group of people leaving the business and changing those dynamics.
Visionary voices, bold breakthroughs. This is Shally's Alley, where top recruiting minds spill their best-kept secrets live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, Raw, unfiltered conversations on sourcing, hiring, and the future of talent, where we ask the tough questions no one else will. Tune in and level up.
That's really interesting. We won't talk about what software we were slinging and what we were writing in when we were in the 3 years and under.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I remember the dot prompt. So this was going like way back.
DOS for APL or Fortran 77. We'll go way back. Yeah. We don't want to mention any more of that.
Yeah.
So if we pivot from that's what you saw the biggest change in last year, how do you, as we move into kind of the next 12, 18 months, nothing happens overnight. But
Yeah.
do you think that trend is going to continue, or do you see something else popping up, as important over the next year plus?
I do think that trend is continuing. And the other thing that I've seen is it's a really hot topic right now. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but, skills. So whether it's, directly or indirectly, there seems to be a heavy focus on this right now. And I think it's a little bit part of this sort of revival of performance management. Not that we're going back to it's always like the pendulum is always there, right?
Well,
we're always swinging back and forth. And, we thought, hey, a lot of people just got rid of performance management, right? Altogether, like, let's just do away with it. And we said, yeah, no, we can't really do that. Like, we really got to figure out if people have the ability to do the jobs that we're hiring them to do. So I think there's a lot more focus on skills, and people are looking for help with sort of how do we lay this out? How do we figure this out? And I don't want to go back to the, competency-based process, because that's arduous and complex. But how do I focus on skills and not just on an individual CV, so that I can find the best person for the job, not just somebody who's had the right title, right? So I think that's going to be another, big area over the next 12 months. And, you combine that with the changing culture, because I do think there's part of that skill, those behavioral skills, that are going to help me not just bring new people into the organization, but evolve the culture of the business and hopefully, innovate some things.
I think that's going to be driven, and get your opinion, that performance management and the skills, the pay equity, pay transparency issue, right?
Yeah.
Is driving at that, because otherwise everyone in the same role theoretically needs to make the same money. But it's actually equitable pay for equitable work. Right. And so how do you start to create, what's equitable work if people have different skills, experience, different performance levels? And so it's helping swing that pendulum back, I think, on the pay equity side, especially if where the EU is right now.
Yeah, no doubt. And, in addition to that, I think partly compensation, but I'd like to see more emphasis on, and I'm not saying I'm seeing it, but I'd like to see more emphasis on financial wellness, because I think, there's been a lot of support for, mental health and just general wellness. But I see a lot of people retiring right now, or thinking about retiring and leaving the workforce, who don't really understand what they've got from a financial perspective. And, I know that's changing for people coming into the organization, but is it? I mean, are people getting more engaged? Do they really know more about what their options are when they get into an organization and how to save for their future? That's just an area that, I personally struggled with. And I was just talking to my brother the other day, who didn't even know that he's about to retire, didn't even know that he had a pension. Like he knew he had a 401k.
Yeah.
Didn't know he had a pension. He's like, oh, well, then I don't need to worry about my 401k right now. But, and people don't, when you're young, you're 25 years old, coming into an organization, that's just not the stuff that you're focused on, right? You're focused
But when
on
you think
today.
about, Teri, though, I always think the dichotomy of this is, if the average tenure at a company, right, is moving down over the years, right? So you've got a more transient workforce that's happening. You've got mental wellness, which is kind of a now thing. And let's be honest, financial wellness is can be a now thing, but it's a long-term thing. how much does a company invest, being devil's advocate?
Yeah.
And how do you do that at what stage, and how do you place value on that? Because to your point, not every employee is going to value, which I guess gets into the whole, personalized total reward space.
Yeah.
But, how does everybody value that the same?
Yeah. I'd like to see some innovation there, because I do think there could be, and I don't have the answers. If I did, I'd go do it and, reap my rewards. But, I think there's an opportunity there. And when you think about all the money that we're spending to bring people into the organization, the goal is still to get people to stay longer, like not to have people turning over every 1 to 3 years, right? When you get good people into the jobs and they're delivering, that's still a goal, even if we're not achieving it.
It's interesting, that one particular goal, which would be a sidebar, I still find interesting because TA, right, is not always aligned with the business. And so if you're in talent acquisition, what are you paid on? Your metrics are generally time to fill, number of recs filled, et cetera, right? They don't go back and offer a bonus for number of employees that reach 3 years. They don't reach, kind of an interesting thing. So to me, there's always been this interesting disconnect between talent acquisition and then how do you perpetuate turnover, right? And to be honest, there's generally TA solving a now problem, right? A manager's got a right now problem, not a hire me somebody for 3 years down the road problem. So I think it is interesting that those two need to be tied together over time. And how do you measure that analytically from the time they start to whatever to show success and put those trends back into the TA process, which sounds great on paper. I understand it sounds very MBA-like, sounds great on paper, but it sounds ridiculously hard, at least in my mind, to put into practice.
Yeah. But it goes back to, being able to tie the people analytics to the business analytics and the business goals, right? And so, does the CEO care that, it took you, 2 months to hire somebody into this critical role? No, what they care about is what you lost in the process. Like, what did we lose during that 2 months while we didn't have somebody in this critical role? And so, there's a big cost, as we all know, and I know this is not a conversation about TA, and it's not a space that I play in all the time, but I'm working with some people right now, and the turnover and onboarding are significant costs, right? And so they're trying to figure out how do we fix this problem, and there's always new and innovative solutions. That's how we keep the wheel turning at HR Tech, right?
That's true. Somebody's always thinking it through. Well, if we spin to not the last question, but the second to last question, with all that stuff going on, if you could solve one HR issue, so I'm curious, what would be the issue? What would it be?
Yeah, that's a hard one. HR has a lot of issues, and unfortunately, HR gets blamed for a lot of stuff, which is really unfortunate because a lot of times, these are not HR issues. Like the example of, getting people back to work, back to the office and things like that. I think a lot of people looked at that and said, well, that's HR's problem. It's not an HR problem, right? I mean, this is an organization problem and the executive leadership problem and a manager problem. It's not an HR problem. So, I think HR plays a critical role in helping the business acquire, educate, retain talent. They do a ton of things that just basically go unnoticed, right? Unless something goes wrong. My paycheck goes wrong, or, my benefits didn't get done right, or I don't have access to the tools I need to do the things I need to do. And I think, what I'd like to see is, better alignment and better partnership at the leadership level. Like, how do we own these challenges from an HR perspective and, help the business solve them? Because, the other thing is that, the people are a significant part of the business, and without the people and without the right people, we can't deliver on the promises the business is making. So I think there's a huge opportunity there for organizations to think about, how do I better partner with HR? Not this whole argument about, does HR have a seat at the table? HR needs to be a business partner, and people need to care about what HR is telling them. At the same time, HR needs to be able to tell them things that make sense to them,
Yep.
right? They need to be able to tell the story of how this is impacting the business, not, hey, we can't hire people fast enough.
No, I think that's fair. I think, they definitely are the messenger,
Yeah.
on many of those times in the operation. Go to work's a good one. I always talk about compensation being the other one, right? Somebody decides it's going to be a 4% increase this year, and then every hiring manager throws HR under the bus that we couldn't give you more money, right?
Right.
And again, were they not at the table, but were they part of the strategic decision of, was it 4%? What happens? Could we save 1% more if we gave 0.5% in the total cost and bring those numbers to the table? So that is a good challenge, which I would probably sum as, how do you tie the HR problems to the business? Because really, at the end of the day, you're right. The business partners care about the business side of it, and how do you tie those two things together?
Yeah, I think HR, when you go into HR, you need to think about being a storyteller, because that's going to be a lot of, what you need to do, because that's what people listen to, right? They want to hear stories. They want to understand it. They want to relate to it. And, I was laughing a little bit ago. I was looking at one of my LinkedIn posts, and I don't post a ton, right? But I think my podcast had gotten posted, and then I commented on something else that got posted. And then I posted a picture of me and some people at dinner and said, hey, we were, having a nice dinner and talking about these issues. Well, then I got this email from LinkedIn about my engagement. You can imagine what the numbers look like, right? Like the engagement with the picture, with the people in it, actually having a conversation and sort of doing something was off the charts. And then my other two posts were like, few people looked at it. So I thought that was interesting, and I think kind of we know some of that intuitively because we're social people, but it just really resonated with me when I saw the difference there. And it was about people engaging, people seeing people being social and telling a story, because we were actually doing something, so that was interesting.
No, that's very cool. I think the whole thing of, not sending a pile of numbers somewhere, the analytics are great, but what story does it tell? And then how do you weave a solution as a story and then go back and see how the story ends, I guess.
No.
It is important versus just the graph.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up, do you have any final thoughts for folks as we head into 2024?
I would want to continue to sort of challenge HR and HR leaders to focus on a couple of things: focus on value, focus on impact, and focus on outcomes. And when you think about how you align with the business's goals, you can't make an impact if you don't know what the goals are. And I think a lot of times we in HR get into keeping the lights on, keeping the process moving, keeping it oiled, right? And making those things happen. But the business has a set of goals. And I think, we as HR and HR leaders need to be in tune with those goals and make sure that we can actually produce some outcomes associated with that. So I think, I'd like to continue to sort of challenge people to do that, because I think it will help us become more focused on business results and less focused on sort of those tedious HR-related tasks.
No, that's a great way to end. I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. Good as always. Great to catch up.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it. This is always fun.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Sean.